remember the sound of the monitor more than anything else. That steady beep echoing in the hospital room, like a metronome counting down the seconds of my life changing forever. I had just given birth. My body was wrecked, sweat cooling on my skin, muscles trembling, my chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. My hands shook as I held my baby for the very first time. She was impossibly small, her skin soft and warm against mine, her tiny fingers curling instinctively around my thumb. I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "You're safe now. I've got you." But when I looked around the room, there was no one else. No flowers, no balloons, no family waiting in the hallway. Just me, my newborn, and the silence. They knew I was here. They knew today was the day. And still, nobody came. The nurse adjusted the blanket around my daughter and gave me a sympathetic smile. "Do you want me to call someone for you?" she asked gently. I swallowed hard. My throat burned as I forced the words out. There's no one to call. And that was the truth. My father had texted me that morning. "Good luck. Keep us posted." That was it. No visit. No offer to drive me. No hand to hold. And my brother? He didn't even bother to send a message. I stared at my baby's face, her eyelids fluttering open for the first time. And I made a silent promise. You will never feel the way I feel right now. Invisible. Unwanted. Alone. The days that followed blurred together. Sleepless nights, aching arms, and quiet tears I tried to hide from my daughter. I brought her home to an empty apartment. No family dinners, no welcome home signs taped to the door. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. I told myself I could handle it. I had to. But deep down, I kept waiting. Waiting for someone to knock on the door. Waiting for someone to say, "We're sorry. We should have been there." That knock never came. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed. Dad's name lit up the screen, and for a moment I thought he might finally ask about me or the baby. But when I opened the message, my stomach sank. It read, "Need $2,200 for your brother's graduation. Everyone's pitching in. Send it by Friday." No. How are you? No, how's the baby? Just a demand. I stared at the screen, my daughter asleep on my chest, her tiny breaths rising and falling against me. Something inside me snapped. They hadn't shown up for her birth. They hadn't even acknowledged her existence. And now they wanted money? I typed back one sentence, "Best wishes." Then I sent exactly $1. It wasn't about the money. It was about the message. For years, I had been the one who bent, who sacrificed, who gave until there was nothing left. But not anymore. This time, I was drawing the line. The fallout came fast. My father called within minutes, his voice sharp and angry. "What is this? A joke?" I kept my tone calm, steady. "No, that's all I can give. Your brother worked hard for this graduation. Family supports family." I laughed bitterly, the sound catching in my throat. Family shows up. Family doesn't ignore the birth of a child and then come asking for money. There was silence on the other end. Then he muttered, You're being dramatic. That word cut deeper than I expected. Because to him, my pain was always an exaggeration. My needs were always too much. My boundaries were always an inconvenience. But this time, I wasn't backing down. That night, I sat in the nursery, rocking my daughter to sleep. The glow of the nightlight painted the walls in soft gold, shadows swaying gently as I hummed to her. I pressed my lips to her forehead and whispered, "You will never have to beg for love. Not from me. Not from anyone." And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about the birth they ignored. It was about respect. It was about finally choosing myself and my daughter over people who had chosen me last my entire life. The next morning, I changed the locks. It wasn't an impulsive decision. It was survival. Because I knew what would come next. The guilt trips, the unannounced visits, the attempts to barge back into my life like nothing had happened. Not this time. This time I was ready. But I wasn't prepared for what happened after. Because when you finally stand up to people who are used to walking over you, they don't just back down. They fight. They twist the story. They make you the villain. And soon, I would learn just how far my family was willing to go to protect their version of the truth. People always say you can't choose your family. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes family chooses against you. I learned that lesson early. My brother Daniel was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Straight B's, he's just more creative. Skip chores, he's busy with school. Borrowed money and never paid it back, he'll figure it out. And me? I was the responsible one. The fixer. The one who stayed home when mom got sick. Who cooked dinner when dad worked late. Who cleaned up the messes no one else wanted to deal with. It wasn't that I wanted to be the caretaker. It was that no one else stepped up. I remember one night in high school, mom had a fever so high she could barely stand. I sat by her bed with a cool cloth, whispering, "It's okay, I'm here." Dad was at work. Daniel was out with friends. When Dad came home, he barely looked at me. He just said, "Good job. You've always been the strong one." At the time, I thought it was a compliment. But now I see it for what it was. Permission. Permission to keep carrying the weight so no one else had to. That pattern never changed. When Daniel wanted to go to college out of state, Dad emptied part of Mom's savings to cover it. When I asked about school, Dad said, "You're smart. You'll figure out scholarships." When Daniel crashed his car, Dad called it boys being boys. When I asked for help with rent after Mom passed, Dad said, "You need to learn independence." It was always the same story. Daniel's mistakes were forgivable. My needs were burdens. So when I got pregnant, I didn't expect much. I told Dad over the phone. He paused for a long time, then said, "Well, I hope you're ready for the responsibility." No congratulations. No excitement. Just a warning. Daniel didn't even respond to my text. Weeks later, he finally sent, "Congrats, I guess." I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need their approval. But deep down, I wanted them to care. I wanted them to show up. During my pregnancy, I went to every doctor's appointment alone. I decorated the nursery alone. I worked double shifts at the hospital to save money, waddling down hallways with swollen ankles and a fake smile plastered on my face. Sometimes I'd sit in the rocking chair at night, rubbing my belly, whispering to my baby, "It's just you and me, kid, but that's enough." Still, I hoped. I hoped that when the big day came, they'd surprise me, that they'd walk into that hospital room with flowers and tears and say, "We're here. We're proud of you." But when the contractions started and I called Dad, he said, "I'll let Daniel know. We'll see what we can do." And then, nothing. That's why the silence in the delivery room cut so deep. It wasn't just about that moment. It was about every moment before it. Every time I had been the afterthought. Every time Daniel had been the priority. When I held my daughter for the first time, I felt two things at once: overwhelming love and crushing loneliness. The weeks after her birth only confirmed what I already knew. Dad didn't visit. Daniel didn't call. The only people who checked in were a couple of coworkers and my neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, who brought over a casserole and said, "You're doing great, honey." It was Mrs. Alvarez, not my own father, who held the baby so I could shower for the first time in days. It was my coworker, not my brother, who dropped off diapers when I ran out. And it was me, always me, who rocked my daughter through the night, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. So when that text came, "Need $2,200 for your brother's graduation," it wasn't just insulting. It was a reminder. A reminder that in my father's eyes, Daniel's milestones were worth celebrating. Mine were worth ignoring. I thought back to all the times I had been told to be the strong one, to figure it out, to stop being dramatic. And I realized they weren't going to change. If I wanted things to be different, I had to be the one to change. That's why I sent the $1. That's why I wrote best wishes. That's why I changed the locks. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting. I was choosing. Choosing myself. Choosing my daughter. Choosing peace over chaos. But peace doesn't come easy when you've spent your whole life being the scapegoat. Because the moment you stop playing the role they wrote for you, the whole family script falls apart. And my father, he wasn't about to let that happen without a fight. The morning after I sent that single dollar, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. First it was Dad, then Daniel, then a string of relatives I hadn't heard from in months. The screen lit up again and again, vibrating against the nightstand like it was demanding my attention. I ignored the first few calls, rocking my daughter in the nursery, humming softly to drown out the sound. Her tiny body was warm against my chest, her breath steady, grounding me in a way nothing else could. But eventually, I picked up. Dad's voice came through, tight with frustration. What was that supposed to mean? I kept my tone calm. It meant exactly what it said. Best wishes. "Don't play games with me," he pressed. "Your brother worked hard for this graduation. Everyone's contributing. You're the only one holding back." I almost let out a bitter laugh. Holding back? I was sitting in my apartment, cradling a newborn in my arms while he was scolding me for not sending over $2,000. "You didn't show up for her birth," I said quietly. "You didn't even call. And now you want money? For Daniel? No." There was a pause. Then his voice dropped into that familiar, patronizing tone. "You're being dramatic again. Always so sensitive. Family helps family." My chest tightened. That word again, dramatic. As if my pain was just a performance. As if being abandoned in the delivery room was nothing more than a tantrum. Family is supposed to be there, I said quietly. They don't ignore the biggest moment of my life and then show up only to ask for money. He ended the call without another word. An hour later, Daniel rang. His tone was calmer than Dad's, but the edge was still there. Look, I don't know what Dad told you, but this isn't about you. It's about me. My graduation matters. Everyone else is helping out. Why can't you? I stared at the phone, my daughter's tiny breaths warm against my chest. Because you didn't pitch in when it mattered, I said. You didn't even text me when she was born. He sighed, annoyed. I was busy. Finals, projects, you know how it is. But this isn't about that. Don't make it about you. That line hit me like a slap. Don't make it about you. As if my daughter's birth, my pain, my joy, my everything was irrelevant. It is about me, I said firmly. It's about us. And if you can't see that, then maybe you don't deserve my help. He muttered something under his breath and hung up. By the end of the day, the family group chat was on fire. Cousins, aunts, even distant relatives chimed in. It's just money. Why are you being so cold? Your brother deserves to be celebrated. You're punishing the whole family because you're bitter. Not one person asked about the baby. Not one person asked how I was healing, or if I needed help, or if I was sleeping at all. It was all about Daniel. Always Daniel. That night, I sat in the dark, scrolling through the messages, my daughter asleep in her bassinet. The glow of the screen lit up the room, each notification another reminder of where I stood in this family, on the outside. I thought about deleting the chat, blocking them all, but then I realized something. For the first time, I wasn't crying. I wasn't begging. I wasn't trying to explain myself to people who had already decided I didn't matter. I was calm. And that calm felt like power. The next day, Dad showed up at my apartment. I saw his car pull into the lot from the window. My stomach tightened, but I didn't move. I had already changed the locks. He knocked hard, his voice booming through the door. Open up. We need to talk. I stayed quiet, rocking my daughter gently. You're making a mistake, he shouted. You can't cut off your family. You'll regret this. I whispered to my baby, No, I won't. After a few minutes, the knocking stopped. His footsteps faded. The car engine roared to life, and then he was gone. But the silence didn't last long. 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Dad's. Inside was a single sheet of paper. You're tearing this family apart. Daniel deserves better. If you don't reconsider, don't be surprised when people stop answering your calls. You'll be on your own. I folded the letter and set it aside. Because the truth was, I had already been on my own for a long time. That week, I started noticing something else. Relatives unfollowed me on social media. Old friends stopped liking my posts. Even a few coworkers gave me strange looks. It was as if they'd heard a version of the story that painted me as the villain. And I realized Dad was spinning it. He was telling everyone I was selfish, that I refused to help, that I was punishing Daniel out of jealousy. It was the same script he'd always used. And for years, I had played my part, the quiet one, the fixer, the scapegoat, but not anymore. Because this time, I had proof. I had the texts. I had the receipts. I had the silence of that hospital room burned into my memory. And if they wanted to make me the villain, I was ready to show the world the truth. The letter from Dad should have been the end of it, but instead, it was just the beginning. Because when you stop playing the role your family wrote for you, they don't just let you walk away. They rewrite the script and cast you as the villain. It started small. A cousin posted a vague status on Facebook. Some people forget where they came from. Sad. Then an aunt chimed in with a comment, "Family is everything. Without it, you're nothing." I knew who they were talking about. Everyone did. By the end of the week, I was the subject of whispered conversations at church, side eyes at the grocery store, and pitying looks from neighbors who had clearly heard only one side of the story. Dad had spun the narrative well. I was the ungrateful daughter who refused to help her brother, the selfish mother who thought she was better than the rest of them. Then came the knock at my door. It was a Saturday afternoon. My daughter was finally napping, the apartment wrapped in a rare, fragile quiet. When I opened the door, Daniel was standing there. He looked different, less like the golden boy I remembered, more like someone cornered. His jaw was tight, his eyes restless. "We need to talk," he said. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "Make it quick. She's sleeping." He shoved his hands in his pockets. "Why are you doing this? Why are you making Dad out to be the bad guy?" I laughed bitterly. "I'm not making him anything. He did that himself." "You don't get it," Daniel snapped. "This graduation is important. It's not just about me, it's about the whole family. Dad's proud. Everyone's proud. And you're ruining it." I stared at him, stunned. "Ruining it? Daniel, you didn't even show up when your niece was born. You didn't call. You didn't text. And now you want me to hand over money like none of that matters?" He shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting away. "I was busy. Finals. Life. You know how it is." "No," I said firmly. "I don't know how it is. Because when I was your age, I was working 2 jobs and taking care of Mom while she was sick. I didn't get to be busy. I didn't get to disappear." His face hardened. "You've always thought you were better than me." That line cut deep, not because it was true, but because it was the story Dad had been feeding him for years. That I was the cold one, the judgmental one, the one who thought she was above them. But the truth was simpler. I had been the one holding everything together while they looked away. The argument escalated fast. Daniel raised his voice, accusing me of being selfish, bitter, dramatic. I fired back, listing every moment they had abandoned me, every time I had been left to carry the weight alone. Neighbors peeked out their windows. A dog barked down the street. And there we were, 2 siblings, shouting in the parking lot like strangers. Finally, I said it. The words I had been holding back for years. "You don't get to demand anything from me. Not money. Not time. Not forgiveness. Not anymore." Daniel's face twisted with anger. "You'll regret this," he spat. "You can't cut us off forever." I looked him dead in the eye. "Watch me." Then I turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind me. But the confrontation didn't end there. 2 days later, Dad showed up again. This time, he didn't come alone. He brought 2 uncles with him, standing outside my apartment like an intervention squad. They knocked. They called my name. They shouted through the door about family obligations and respect. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat on the couch, holding my daughter close, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, because I knew what this was. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about control, about reminding me that no matter how far I tried to run, they believed they still owned a piece of me. That night, I called the landlord, explained the situation, asked about my rights. He was sympathetic. "You did the right thing changing the locks," he said. "If they keep showing up, call the police. You don't owe them access to your home." For the first time, I felt a flicker of relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was protecting myself and my child. But Dad didn't stop. The next week, I got another letter. This one was harsher, angrier. "You're tearing this family apart. You'll regret this when you're alone. Don't come crawling back when you realize no one wants you." I read it once, then tore it in half. Because here's the thing, I wasn't alone. I had my daughter. I had the neighbors who checked in. I had the coworkers who dropped off meals. And most importantly, I had myself, stronger than I had ever been. Still, the pressure was building. Dad wasn't backing down. Daniel wasn't backing down. And the rest of the family was circling like vultures, waiting for me to break. But what they didn't realize was that the more they pushed, the more certain I became. This wasn't just a fight about money. This was a fight about freedom. And I was done living in their cage. But deep down, I knew something else too. When people like my father feel their grip slipping, they don't just let go. They tighten their fists. They escalate. And the storm that was coming would test me in ways I had never imagined. After Dad's second visit, the one where he brought the uncles, the apartment felt different, quieter, heavier. Every creak of the floorboards made me tense. Every knock at the door made my heart race. I found myself double-checking the locks at night, pulling the curtains closed even in the middle of the day. It wasn't just about safety. It was about peace. And peace felt fragile, like a candle flickering in the wind, one wrong breath away from being snuffed out. One evening, I sat in the nursery, rocking my daughter as the sun dipped below the horizon. The room glowed in soft amber light, shadows stretching across the walls like long fingers. She slept soundly against my chest, her tiny breath steady and warm. I should have felt calm. But instead, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. The texts, the letters, the shouting through the door, the way my own father had turned me into the villain of his story. And beneath it all, the ache of something deeper, grief. Not grief for Mom, though I missed her every day, but grief for the family I wished I had. The family I kept hoping would show up, even when they never did. I thought back to the hospital room, the silence, the empty chair beside my bed. I had told myself I didn't need them, that I was strong enough on my own. But the truth was, I had wanted them there. I had wished my father would hold my hand. I had wished my brother would look at his niece and say, "She's beautiful." I had wished someone, anyone, would remind me I wasn't alone. Instead, there was silence, and then requests. The fallout wasn't only emotional, it showed up in daily life too. In a small town, word travels quickly. At the grocery store, I caught whispers. "That's the one who distanced herself from her family." At church, people avoided eye contact, their smiles polite but strained. Even at work, a coworker leaned over and said gently, "Why not just give them the money? It would be easier." Easier, as if my dignity, my boundaries, and my daughter's future were things to be set aside. I smiled politely, but inside, I was screaming. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. On one side, I wrote down everything I had lost: my father's approval, my brother's respect, the illusion of belonging. On the other side, I wrote what I had gained: a home that was mine, a daughter who looked at me like I was her whole world, the strength to finally say no. The second list was shorter, but it was heavier, more real. And for the first time, I realized that maybe losing them wasn't the tragedy I thought it was. Maybe it was the beginning of something better. Still, the loneliness crept in, especially late at night when the baby finally slept. When the apartment was quiet, I'd scroll through old photos, family vacations, holidays, smiles that now felt staged, like masks we all wore to hide the fractures underneath. I'd wonder if I made the right choice, if I was being too harsh, if maybe, just maybe, I should have sent the money and kept the peace. But then I'd hear my daughter stir. I'd see her tiny hand reaching for me in the dark. And I'd remember, peace built on silence isn't peace at all. It's surrender. And I was done surrendering. The reflection didn't make the pain disappear, but it gave it shape. I started journaling every night, pouring out the words I couldn't say to them: the anger, the grief, the hope. I wrote letters to Mom, telling her everything that had happened. I imagined what she would say. I imagined her telling me she was proud, that I was doing the right thing, that breaking the cycle was worth the cost. Sometimes I cried so hard I could barely see the page. Other times I felt lighter, as if the act of writing was stitching me back together, one word at a time. One night I wrote a single sentence that stopped me cold. Maybe family isn't who you're born to. Maybe it's who shows up. I stared at the words, my pen hovering above the page. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? Family wasn't Dad, who demanded money but never gave love. It wasn't Daniel, who skipped the birth but expected my sacrifice. It wasn't the aunts and cousins who whispered behind my back. Family was Mrs. Alvarez, who brought me food when I was too tired to cook. Family was my coworker, who slipped diapers into my locker with a sticky note that said, "You've got this." Family was my daughter, who looked at me with eyes that said, "You are enough." The fallout hurt. It cut deep. But in the reflection, I found something I hadn't expected: clarity. I didn't need to win them back. I didn't need to prove my worth. I didn't need to keep bleeding just to keep the peace. All I needed was to keep showing up for myself and for her. And even with that clarity, I knew the challenges weren't finished. People like my father rarely step back quietly. They press, they test, they try to pull you back into the roles you've left behind. And deep down, I sensed there would be more to face moments that would push me, moments that would ask me to stand even firmer in the choice I had made. The night after Dad's last letter, I sat at the kitchen table with my daughter asleep in the bassinet beside me. The apartment was quiet, but my mind wasn't. For weeks, I had been reacting to texts, to knocks on the door, to whispers in the community. But as I stared at the torn pieces of Dad's letter, I realized something. I didn't have to react anymore. I could act. The next morning, I opened my laptop and pulled up the messages. The text demanding $2,200. My best wishes reply. The follow-up calls. The guilt-soaked letters. I wasn't planning to post them online, not yet, but I wanted to see them all in one place. To remind myself I wasn't crazy. As I scrolled, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I wasn't ashamed. I wasn't scared. I was angry, but in a clean way, a focused way, the kind of anger that doesn't destroy you, the kind that builds you. That week, I started making changes. I called the landlord again, not just to confirm the locks, but to add a note to my file. No one but me was authorized to enter. I spoke to a lawyer at a free clinic who explained my rights in plain language, stripping away the fog of fear. I even reached out to a local support group for single parents, just to hear voices that understood. And slowly, the fear began to fade, because knowledge is power. And for the first time, I had both. Then came the moment that changed everything. I was at the pediatrician's office for my daughter's checkup when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. "You've made your point, but you're embarrassing Dad. Just send the money and move on." I stared at the screen, my daughter cooing in my arms, and I felt a calm I hadn't felt in months. I typed back, "I don't owe you anything. Not money, not silence, not anymore." At night, for the first time, I blocked his number. That night, I sat down to write, not in my journal this time, but in a letter I planned to keep. It wasn't to Dad. It wasn't to Daniel. It was to myself. You are not dramatic. You are not selfish. You are not ungrateful. You are a mother. You are strong. You are enough. I taped it to the fridge, right where I'd see it every morning. Because the truth was, I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their version of family. I had my own. The redemption didn't come in one big moment. It came in small ones. Like the first time I laughed again, really laughed, when my daughter scrunched her nose in a way that looked exactly like Mom's. Like the day Mrs. Alvarez knocked on my door with groceries and said, "You don't have to do this alone." Like the moment I realized I could pay my bills without Dad's help, without Daniel's approval, without anyone else's permission. Each moment was a brick, and together, they built something I hadn't had in years, a foundation. But the real reversal came when I stopped hiding. For weeks, I had been shrinking, afraid of what people thought, afraid of the whispers. But one night, I opened my social media and wrote a post. I didn't name names. I didn't air dirty laundry. I just told the truth. When my daughter was born, no one from my family showed up. Weeks later, they asked me for money. I said no, and I don't regret it. Because family isn't who demands from you. Family is who shows up. I hit post and closed the app, my hands shaking. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of comments. Not judgment, not shame. Support. Other mothers, other daughters, other people who had been through the same thing. "Thank you for saying this. I thought I was the only one. You're right. Family is who shows up." For the first time, I didn't feel alone. Dad never responded to the post. Neither did Daniel. But I didn't need them to, because the story wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. And in telling it, I had taken back something they could never steal again: my voice. One evening, as I rocked my daughter to sleep, I whispered to her, "We're rewriting the story, baby. It doesn't end with them. It begins with us." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The weeks after my post felt different. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for the next blow. I wasn't waiting for the phone to buzz with another demand or for a knock to rattle the door. Instead, I woke up each morning to something new: quiet. Not the heavy, suffocating quiet of abandonment, but the kind of quiet that feels like space, like possibility. I filled that space with small things: morning walks with the stroller, the sun warming my daughter's cheeks as she blinked up at the sky, coffee on the balcony, steam curling into the cool air while I let myself breathe without rushing, laughter, real laughter, when she discovered her own giggle for the first time. And finally, I was ready to stop waiting. The redemption wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. That I could build a life without their approval. That I could raise my daughter without their help. That I could be whole, even if they never showed up. And slowly, I began to believe it. Then came the moment that sealed it. It was a Sunday morning. My daughter was lying on a blanket in the living room, kicking her legs, babbling to herself. The light poured in through the window, catching the wisps of her hair, making her look like she was crowned in gold. These weren't grand victories. They weren't Instagram-worthy milestones. But they were mine, and they were enough. One afternoon, Mrs. Alvarez stopped by with a plate of cookies. She sat at my kitchen table, sipping tea, her eyes kind but sharp like someone who has weathered countless storms. "You seem lighter," she said. I smiled, surprised at how true it felt. "I think I am." She nodded knowingly, and in that moment I felt a flicker of hope. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't letting go of people. It's letting go of the version of them you wish they could be. Her words sank deep into my heart, echoing the truth I had been avoiding. I hadn't just been mourning my father or my brother. I had been mourning the family I kept wishing they'd become. It's a heavy realization, one that wraps around my heart like a vice, making it hard to breathe. I picked up Mom's old photo, the one Dad had given me years ago, back when he still pretended to care. I held it next to my daughter and whispered, "She would have loved you." And for the first time, instead of sadness, I felt peace. Because I realized I wasn't repeating the cycle. I was breaking it. The calls from Dad eventually stopped. The letters stopped. Even the whispers in town faded. And in their place, something else grew. A new circle. A new family. Neighbors who checked in. Friends who showed up. Strangers online who shared their own stories of boundaries and survival. It wasn't the family I was born into, but it was the family I chose. And that made all the difference. One night, as I rocked my daughter to sleep, I whispered, "You will never have to beg for love. Not from me. Not from anyone. Because you are enough. And so am I." Her tiny hand curled around my finger, and in that moment, I knew the story wasn't about what I lost. It was about what I gained. Freedom, strength, a future that belonged to us. And that's why I'm sharing this with you. Because maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity. Maybe you've been told you're dramatic, selfish, ungrateful, when all you wanted was respect. If that's you, Hear me now. You are not alone. The truth is, family isn't just who you're born to. Family is who shows up. It's the neighbor who knocks on your door with groceries, the coworker who slips diapers into your locker, the friend who texts thinking of you when the silence feels too heavy. And sometimes it's the little hand that curls around yours in the dark, reminding you that love doesn't have to be begged for. It can be given freely. So if you're listening to this and you're standing where I once stood, torn between silence and survival, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me. You don't have to keep playing the role they wrote for you. You can write your own. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is show